Right, today we're gonna talk about the conflict between China and Japan concerning the small islands called Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. So what I'm gonna do, how I'm gonna proceed is I'm gonna see on the Chinese side from a Chinese perspective, and then on the Japanese side on a Japanese perspective. And I want to be honest with you, I'm not an expert, I don't have any qualification in geopolitics. However, I lived in Asia for a bit more than a year. I worked there, studied there. I lived in Japan, I live in Korea. I have many friends from China, and I do speak a bit of Chinese. So bear in mind that I might not be right on every point, but I try to get the maximum of correct knowledge before I talk about something. So if you find something that is not correct in my statement, please let me know. And really, I just don't consider myself like an expert, and I want to be honest with you from the very first video. So please let me know if something is wrong, and please let me know if you appreciate the video. So keep tuned and we move to the next part. Alright, good. So in the first part I'm gonna talk about China from a Chinese perspective, and in the second part I'm gonna talk about Japan from a Japanese perspective. But first I want to talk about something. I want to talk about the relationship between China and Japan very briefly. It's a very complex relationship made of mutual trade, mutual enlightenment, and wars. Okay, so I mean, if you look at the Chinese culture heavily influenced the Japanese culture in the early days, and then Japan influenced China again, and then China influenced Japan. So there's been a lot of trade, and there's been a lot of mutual culture enlightenment. Okay, there've been wars as well between these two countries. So you have to look at. There's been 3 wars actually. There's been a war in the 13th century. So that was the Empire of China and Korea against Japan, and the Chinese and the Korean lost the war because they were like a storm, and many sunks transporting the Chinese troops sunk. So that was in the 13th century. Then you have the second war in the 16th century, and the exact date is 1592. You can have a look on Wikipedia if you want, or books. You'll have an article on that. And this is the time where Japan tried for the first time to invade Korea, and the Japanese have been beaten by the Korean thanks to the help of the Chinese. And then you have the wars between China and Japan and Korea and Japan during the 20th century. So as a whole, there've been a lot of wars, and there've been a lot of trade, and there's been a lot of enlightenment. So it's not all about war. You have to keep that in mind. Even today, even though Japan and China, the relationship is not very good, you can still see that Toyota is heavily implanted in China, and that Chinese companies invest in Japan. So it's not all about conflicts and island and anything like that. So now in the next part I'm gonna heavily focus on China, and I'm gonna talk about a little bit of history, economy, social, like a kind of puzzle. So keep yourself tuned. Okay, so now from the Chinese perspective. So why do you think Chinese people are so sensitive about this island? And when I say the Chinese people, I also mean the government. Okay, there's one lead that can help us to understand why is it so sensitive in China and its history. It's very complex. I don't want to get into details, but basically China used to be a very, 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 very strong empire, and I mean, during the Roman Empire until the 19th century. And from the 19th century, China declined as an empire. And what you have to know is that they were trading with the British, but the trade between Great Britain and China was very unequal for Great Britain. So what the British did is that they stopped selling opium to the Chinese to have a more fair trade between the Great Britain and the empire. So of course more and more people started to use opium and use drugs, and at some point the emperor says stop, you're not gonna trade opium anymore. And what followed is basically a war between the Chinese Navy and the British Navy. And from that very point, the fate of China changed. There's been a big navy battle you have to imagine, in the Pacific, in the Chinese Sea, and the Chinese Navy has been literally crushed, destroyed. 64 casualties for the British, 20,000 men lost in 5 hours for the Chinese. Imagine, 5 hours, the whole Chinese Navy destroyed. And from that very moment, China declined. First of all, China lost Hong Kong. The Great Britain, the British Empire, forced China to accept opium, so it forced the Chinese government to allow its citizens to get sick and to use drugs. Like, understand what's going on. They also lost 5 ports, in the way that before the opium was just going through one port. Now it came from 5 different ports within China, and the Chinese had to pay a huge amount in terms of money. It was just awful, and many people call it the most unfair treaty ever. I mean, this is literally the most unfair treaty on earth until now. So you see that in the Chinese perspective, it's just horrible from the very beginning of the decline. Then you had several wars with France, Germany, Dutch, England, or sometimes all together, and Russia, and every time the Chinese tried to regain their sovereignty, they've been defeated by foreign power, and in a way that you can't imagine. Like they were like 1 to 10, let's say, and every time they fought against us, they lost. And then you have the 20th century, which is even worse for China. The first Sino-Japanese war, they lost the war against Japan. Big defeat again. And then the second one, a lot of civilians died. It was just awful for China. They've got a lot of Chinese who were corrupted, a lot of Chinese who died. The whole system collapsed basically for good. Then you had Mao Zedong, who killed million of people. And then basically you can say that China have been at peace for only 40 years, last 300 years. Sorry, yeah, we've been at peace for 40 years, last 300 years. So imagine yourself in your own country, like a country devastated for 300 years. Imagine that, like the weight for the Chinese. So the Chinese, basically, the reason why they don't want the Japanese to to control this island is purely symbolic. It's purely it reminds them of the past. So they say we're powerful enough to say no, and this is no. So you have to imagine how important it is for Chinese. Now the second lead I want to talk about, and I want to cite, I watched a video on YouTube, and that was about the rising tension between China and America, and there were military, so this topic is about military. A Chinese military expert was saying, like, you don't understand how we work. If you take the map of China, right, and you reverse it, then you'll understand that for us what's very important is the south, not the north. Like the borders at the north are basically secured. There's Mongolia in between Russia and China. And the south is the most important part of China for several reasons. It's like basically the most inhabited part of China. There's Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing. So there's the political part, the financial part, and the commercial part within the south. So So you have to know that if you're a Chinese military or a Chinese president or chairman, as I say, you have to push your boundaries away from these cities, away from the south of China. So you save your industry, you save your people, you save your culture, etc., etc. So for that reason, the authorities in China are absolutely against the fact that Japan could take these islands, because for them they want to have Japan and America and Korea away from them, away from these three cities I just cited. So that's the basically the second lead. And then you can talk about the economy, but I think for me the economy about this island is very little. I mean, these islands have some gas apparently, and there's fish around, and you know, like fish in Asia is very important. So they want to keep the fish and they want to keep the gas for themselves. You know, it's a state, and a state is not philanthropic. A state is kind of egoist in some way, at least against other. So that's the Chinese perspective. I think I covered all my points. Now I'm gonna move on the Japanese perspective, and then I'm trying to do like a quick conclusion. So keep listening, please, and if you noticed if you have any point you want to contest, or if you want to discuss about any point, I will be glad to hear your comments. Don't worry. So now we're gonna talk about Japan.